Welcome to the ClassCast Podcast, where philosophy, policy, pedagogy, and people come together in honest, purposeful conversations about improving school and education for our students and our communities. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens, an award-winning English teacher, speaker, tutor, and podcast host in Northern Virginia. You can listen and subscribe to the ClassCast Podcast on all major streaming services, on YouTube, and at ClassCastPodcast.com. Ladies and gentlemen, class is in session. Welcome to the ClassCast Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Tibbens. Today, we'll be speaking with Sonny Thadani, the CEO and co-founder of Robin, which is a great new social emotional learning company based out of New York. We've talked about social emotional learning a couple times in this podcast in the past, once or twice with people who are delivering the instruction or providing services, and a few times just talking with other teachers about their experience with it. But this is, I think it's something we're going to hear more, not less about over the next few years in schools. It's already been growing. I think that's going to continue. And so I thought this is a great opportunity to talk to Sonny about his work and how he got involved in the field. So Sonny, thank you very much for taking the time to speak today. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me. And a big congrats again to baby boy number 3. I know the feeling. I have 3 myself. So good luck. It's amazing and very tiring.
Yeah. And I'm on paternity leave right now, right? So that helps. It's funny. My wife and I have devised this system where I stay up late with the baby and then bring it to bed. And then she, anything after about 2:30 in the morning, that's on her. But I get her the whole first part of the night to sleep. So, if I start saying something weird, it's because I'm tired. I apologize. So I guess my first question is sort of how you got involved in education, because you have a background in I believe in business and consulting and things like that. And so over the last couple of years, you've gotten involved with social emotional learning and providing these services to students and, through schools. What sort of created that shift? Like, at what point did you get interested in education and the kind of work you're doing now?
Sure. Yeah, I was lucky enough, and I appreciate that, Ryan, because it's part of why we're here today and why I'm discussing Robin and social emotional learning and coaching with you. Over the past 11 years, I've been lucky enough to start a company in the financial and professional services arena. I'm actually sitting in that office right now here in Midtown as I use the office from time to time. But over the last couple of years, as got married, started having kids, started reflecting on life and thinking about what I wanted to do and how my career evolved. A few personal things were happening at that moment as well. One, a couple of years ago, I met with a gentleman who, his name is Mark Barden. He's one of the co-founders of Sandy Hook Promise. It's a nonprofit out up in Connecticut, in Newtown, Connecticut, that followed the tragedy 10 years ago with one of the many school shootings that has happened. And after I met Mark and his team, I was just personally inspired. I was a new dad at that time. Now, like you, I have 3, but at that time I had my daughter, Sonia, and I just couldn't imagine someone taking her away from me in that fashion. And what I learned through volunteering and supporting this organization is, yes, there was some gun policy and gun advocacy, but really what they were talking about and what they were moving forward and how they are working with schools is really about mental health and teaching young students about mental well-being, support for teachers, educators, and parents. And it just got me thinking a little bit more and more about personal life and professional. The second part, over the past couple of years, I was lucky enough to get coaching. I had a mentor, and I still do. I had some executive coaching, speaking coach, and then someone recommended for me a life coach. And at the time, I really didn't know why or what or how, but I was intrigued by this idea, sort of to better myself, better my career, better my relationships. And after interviewing a handful of coaches, I was enthralled by this Cameron, right? He's called Coach Cam, and he worked with me on me and myself and my thoughts and my mission and my values and where I want to go, not just my business goals or my career goals, but some of my life goals, which affects everything in really that you do. And I can honestly say it changed the course of my life. It helped me think through what I want to do with my time, how I want to spend it with my kids, my wife, my social, my friends. And that led me to start thinking about, wow, if coaching changed who I am in my late 30s, now early 40s, wow, when I was 14 years old and my parents got divorced and I didn't make varsity anything, and every girl said no to the junior prom, I wish I had a coach then to help me think through and develop the skill sets like resiliency. Everybody talks about mindfulness, how to make better decisions. These are skill sets that you can learn. And boy, I wish when I was 14, I couldn't have a coach. Some people maybe have private coaches at that age, but it made me think a lot about, wait a minute, can we teach kids these skill sets? Because everybody over the past couple of years, COVID put a magnifying glass on it, talked about mental well-being. But what are we doing about that, right? Instead of addressing the problem when it happens, how do we think about it being preventative? And I think schools and in the four walls, or the four walls of Zoom and the four walls of school, are really where a lot of the education happens still in this country. And that's where I started thinking about, wait a minute, can we start teaching kids in school? Can this be part of the school day from 9 to 3? And that started the evolution for Robin.
Right. Yeah. And I think everything you're saying both mirrors what I'm seeing in schools, but I think makes a lot of sense. On the side, in addition to doing the podcast and teaching and all that, I run a small private tutoring service, and something that has really sort of unexpectedly evolved over the last couple of years is as I've made a shift to focusing on, like, say, college admissions essays, where it's very personal writing. What's happening is I'm finding myself sort of sliding into this role of like short-term life coach, because we have to have these talks about, like, well, what do you want from your education? Like, why are you applying to this school? And then why is that important to you? And then, as the kid's trying to write this essay about this experience they had, traveling or something the year before, you got to get away from, well, I went and saw these places. Like, okay, great. But what does that say about you? And then it turns into a lot of reflection. And I find that it's very rewarding. I also think that it's a thing that, as you pointed out, sometimes needs to be done either one-on-one or small group. And I think that sometimes, we find the people that we need, so for me, I can think back, I had, one or two college professors that I went to when I, had questions or needed help, or I had a couple of high school teachers, but those were people who weren't assigned to me. Like, I had my English major advisor, and then I went next door to my guy. Right. And so I think about this a lot in, say, the school that I teach. I'm now in an online program, but the brick and mortar schools in my system do the same thing. We do like an advisory every day, like a homeroom sort of period. And a lot of the SEL stuff we're doing is delivered through it. And some of it I think is effective. I think some of it, it's tricky because I have juniors and seniors. And I think by that point, the delivery probably has to change. Maybe we can talk about that later. But I always feel like it's a tricky thing, because with some of the kids who I know well, we form a relationship. Those are productive conversations. And sometimes with the kids I don't know as well, or, just aren't interested, or I'm not their guy, they don't really have a lot of interest in it. And so as you think about your experience where, say, you met a bunch of coaches and you found someone that you worked well with and you had this great experience, when you think about how you turn around and deliver that kind of service to students, how important is that personal connection? Like, is it any teacher can show up with a room of 20 kids or 15 kids and do this? Or do you think that the school should be scheduling this carefully? Like, how important, I guess, for you is that personal relationship between the coach and those students?
Yeah, I think it's important. And I think it's important because of what you just referenced and how kids learn, right? You have your own 3 kids and you'll learn from the baby. Our kids are different, right? Even if they have the same DNA with the same parents, and they learn a different way, they accept things and they adapt to things in different ways. So there is not one coach for everybody. At the same time, the way Robin approaches it and understands is, let's listen to our students. Let's listen to our educators. As you pointed out, Ryan, I don't have a background in education. So 2 things were really important to me when we started Robin. Surround myself with people in and around education, and ask the customer, right? Call it the voice of the customer. So before we started, or as we started doing these focus groups, and with students, parents, and teachers. And unbelievably, a couple themes came up. Some surprised me, some made sense, and some I'm still learning from. But a lot of the students, they told us there's no continuity and consistency in their school when it comes to SEL, mental well-being, mental wellness. Pick the phrase you want to use. And a lot of the even educators and students agreed. They said, listen, if there's ever an incident, a fight, a bullying incident, something, God forbid, even worse, they bring in a speaker, a coach, a therapist. They have office hours for 3 weeks, and then it's kind of back to normal, right? Back to school, back to class. So the second thing I heard from a group of students and educators, and this surprised me a little bit, is that when they did have a speaker or a coach come in to talk to them about these topics, like how to be more self-aware, how to build resiliency, how to think about mindfulness and what it is, they actually don't want to hear from celebrities or athletes. I mean, they like to follow them on TikTok and Instagram and all the other social media sites. But when it comes down to it, they want to listen to people that were once in their shoes, that look and feel like them. So to your point about the relationship, I think it's really important for the students and the communities to have a coach that understands that particular community. Now, that doesn't mean if we're working with a school in Texas, you have to have a coach from Texas. But it does mean as an organization, we have to listen to our educators and our students about what is going on with that community. What are the challenges they are facing? And how can we as a company provide them with the right curriculum, the right content, and the right coach to help them through such a challenge? And that's where I think the relationship, maybe less directly with the student, because what we do, we don't do one-on-one coaching. We coach the community, right? Starting with the students and then educators and parents. So I think community, understanding what is happening within that community and what the history is like, is really important to create an effective program.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. I know that the school that I formerly worked at, they were looking to do something like that. They were thinking like, how do we match students with the teachers? How do we, get this? Because they really believed the relationship piece was going to be, imperative to having a successful SEL program. And the initial thought was we're going to let students choose. And then they did a survey and they were like, as it turns out, 70% of the students in this building want to go to the same 8 teachers. And they're like, so that's not going to work, and so they had to shuffle it around and figure it out. But, I think you made an interesting point, is that some of this is about coaching the students, but some of it's also about providing, say, support to the educators, to the teachers, the counselors, things like that. And this is where, again, I'm speaking from a high school perspective. So I think that the reaction and the buy-in from the teachers is probably a little bit different by grade level. I think that some of this, not that social emotional learning is more important or easier done in the elementary school, but I think a lot of elementary school teachers get into their job thinking about helping students to learn to manage their emotions and to, make these good decisions. And that isn't necessarily something at the forefront of a lot of high school teachers' thoughts as they're getting into, if you're the AP chemistry teacher, did you become the AP chemistry teacher so that you could help a kid, be more mindful? It hopefully it's part of what you're trying to do, but maybe that wasn't a top goal. I think that one of the things that sometimes teachers balk at is they feel like this either isn't my job, which may not be true, right, but or they feel like it's asking them to sort of slide out of their job and become a counselor. And I know that there's some people, like I have some friends who like the idea of social emotional learning and who want to do a good job, but who also feel like they're not well equipped. And as a result, they're hesitant because they're like, look, if I do this wrong, I can damage this kid. It would be better if I said nothing. And as a result, they don't necessarily buy into the program sometimes. When you think, say, from your perspective and the work that Robin's doing, how do you try to bridge that gap, or what support do you provide for the teachers who are ultimately going to be delivering a lot of this to the students?
Sure. Well, that's twofold. I think what I learned early on, and Scott Farber, my co-founder, says this a lot. He came from a family of educators, and I think his mother gave him this advice: support teachers, help teachers, and get the heck out of their way, right? Because it's their classroom, they know the kids. So part of our program doesn't rely on teachers executing it day to day, because of exactly what you just said. Some teachers might love it, hate it, or somewhere in between, but it's not necessarily their job, their day job, quote unquote, for some of them. So what we did early on is we asked teachers and school counselors and administrators, how can social emotional learning, mental wellness fit into your school community? And again, every community is different. And there are not 45 minutes every day to teach mindfulness. There just isn't, right? There's things to do to prepare for the regents, the core, the SATs, ACTs, et cetera. So what we like to do and what we created a digital curriculum and content that can be administered by any teacher if they want to. We created content that has 1 minute mindful moments. So before a big chemistry test, if a teacher notices the kids know this and they got this, but they're anxious, they're nervous, it's their final exam, maybe playing a mindful moment before the test starts will get them in the right headspace to execute on this test because he or she knows they can do it. Maybe it's a 5 to 7 minute group lesson that the high school students our curriculum is K through 12, but frankly, we focus a lot on the middle school and high school because there isn't, to me, a great solution out there for 6 through 12. There are some wonderful solutions, I think, for K through 4, K through 5, but the middle school, high school, it's actually students driving this. Students want this. And that's where I see the change. And this is not a COVID thing. I think this has been happening for years, that students are driving some of these decisions. And part of our curriculum, especially for the older students, they can log in and they can do it themselves without the full direction of a teacher day to day. Now, do they need the teacher to be involved? And what we do is we talk to school counselors and teachers. We understand maybe it's the English teacher who really buys into this, and we can implement the Robin program in English or advisory period. We are not going to push this on and say this has to be every week in this class or that class. It just won't work for the teachers and it won't work for the students. So I think listening again to what each school community needs and crafting a program and being flexible to their needs. A lot of our coaching sessions are done during the school day, during advisory period, during a homeroom, maybe even an after school. There's a community school here in Lower Manhattan that has Robin coaches come in every Wednesday or Friday at 3:30 after the bell rings, purely voluntary. And guess what? Tons of kids come because they want to learn. I think students are driving the change here more than anybody around social emotional learning and coaching because they need it. The pressures that these kids face, I guess I don't remember, maybe I'm too far removed, but high school was pretty fun. Was it great? I wasn't the star quarterback or star of the debate team, but I enjoyed it. And what I'm hearing and seeing is a lot of stress. And it's not just social media. I think that's one of the factors and maybe a large factor, but it's a lot of the stress in the world we live in today. It's different than 20 years ago, at least when I went to high school. So I think listening to our kids and understanding what they need and supporting our teachers with not just another login and not just another program, which they're sick of, but also giving them the tools they need for themselves, not for them to teach the students, right? A lot of programs, it's PD, we'll teach you how to implement this program so you can teach your kids. Very important. But how about a program designed for teachers? How about a program designed because teachers are stressed out more than ever. They're quitting in record numbers and leaving, not only quitting and leaving, but leaving the entire field altogether. How about supporting those counselors, administrators, and teachers? And that's where coaching in small groups can be really beneficial for them. They're also unbelievably asking for this from outside resources.
I think that it's really interesting that you say that because, I've seen a lot, there's been a lot of, it's funny, but kind of snarky posts from teachers, some memes and stuff about, oh, hey, we want you to take care of your wellness. So wear jeans on Friday, or hey, we're worried about teachers' well-being, and your mental health. So sign up for this program where you can record how many steps you walk in a day. And it's like, no one's saying walking is important, but maybe that's not the thing that's going to ultimately, tip the scales to improve teacher mental health. And, it's like any other job where you're working with people. You have to remember that everyone involved has feelings. And so not that any program, I don't think we should do really hardly anything in schools that is for teachers that isn't also for students, and I do, and I break with some of my peers there where I think, if it's good for the teachers, but it's not immediately good for the students, or if it's bad for the students, we probably, need to reconsider. But something like this, reducing teacher stress or improving the teacher's sort of emotional well-being can help the students, because now you don't snap at the kids, or you're a little more understanding. We can be more patient, more flexible. And so while I've had a few conversations about social emotional learning, and at least I've done one episode with someone else who provides services, they focus a little bit more on younger students, but this is the first time I've heard anyone mention providing support or service to the staff and the faculty in the building, which I think is a really interesting idea. You mentioned sort of being flexible and in providing, a package, a curriculum that works for that school, for that local community, for those students, and maybe even those teachers. In terms of like how you administer that, and we don't have to get too technical. I'm just curious, like, what do you have like here's like a core, like this is our base curriculum, and then we flex out pieces? Are you talking about like you have an individual coach that's assigned to a school and you sort of work ground up? Like, differentiation in the classroom is a good idea that can be difficult to do well. And you're essentially saying we can differentiate what we're doing for a wide variety of communities. How do you approach that? Like, how do you guys think about adapting for a given school system?
Yeah, there's a couple things that we do in our listening and our onboarding process. There are a lot of schools who have been thinking about SEL way before we ever did, right? And before we ever. So whether it's a nonprofit, a for-profit, they might have the school counselor's recommendation of curriculum. They might have CASEL-aligned curriculum, just like us. They might have X or Y program. And what we don't want to do, especially if it's working or they're happy with it, is change and say you have to buy the Robin curriculum in order to do X, Y, and Z. What we do is to say, great, you have great coaches already, great speakers, great assemblies, and you don't need any of that stuff from Robin. That's great. But when that person leaves or when you need something else, there is that continuity and consistency. So you don't have to buy our coaching services, but we have a digital curriculum. We're much more price conscious of that. And they say, I only need the digital curriculum. Great. We'll provide you with that digital curriculum. And it might just be for ninth grade. So a school that we worked with recently, big high school, 9 through 12, they said they love the Robin program, but they want to start with the freshmen. And the reason they said that is because the freshmen just came from a new school. It's already a tough year in terms of their transition. Layer in COVID, remote school, new kids, being in a building first time after 2 years, they're going through a lot. So we focused our curriculum and our program purely on the freshmen in year one. And what that did, it allowed us to learn the community even more, work with the cohort. I mean, there's 1,000 kids in their freshman class, but to work with them and understand. And now the program, semester 2, is now going to focus on the juniors. So we heard from this school. This is a school that's fairly competitive. SATs are coming up. Test anxiety, I briefly mentioned that, is a very real thing. We have a program designed for juniors around test anxiety. So 2, 4, 6, 8 weeks before the SATs or ACTs or other big tests, depending on where you live and how your school does it, we help go through a program. Now, it's not for the whole school. Now, it can be for certainly different cohorts and different classes, but it's specifically designed for this in case. And I'll tell you, people are so excited because they're starting to see the results, right? They're starting to see their kids a bit more calm and a bit more focused. There are many, many studies. Again, we're a young company. I don't have years worth of data to show you a correlation between the Robin program and SAT scores or educational scores or report cards. I don't just yet. But there are many studies out there that show these types of programs will drastically improve academic outcomes. And to your first point about college, why? Why do you want to go to this school? What have you learned about yourself? And I think part of what this does, we spark a conversation. We're not going to solve the issues and challenges. We're not even going to teach you mindfulness in a day. It takes years of practice, but we're going to start the conversation and we're going to start building a habit throughout the school year, even if it's 1 minute a week. I love this phrase that I use, and I stole from Ariana Huffington, actually, where I heard it first. She said, take micro steps that are too small to fail, right? These 1 minute, 5 minute things will start making a real difference. And imagine you start that in 6th grade, 5th grade, and do it all the way up to high school. By the time you're in college and some challenge, because life's challenges come up all the time on a sliding scale, hopefully our kids will have the skill set to deal with that better. It won't resolve a big issue, but they'll be able to deal with it in a better fashion than maybe turning to drugs or alcohol or things that might be even worse than that. And this is what the Robin program is trying to do. We're trying to build skill sets that they can use throughout the course of their life.
Right. Yeah. And I've said for years, and I think, there's been a magnifying glass put to this idea over the last couple of years with, distance learning and COVID shutdowns and things like that. But I always said, 50% of the most important things you learn in school, you learn in the cafeteria, the hallway, and on the bus. Yeah. You learn how to get along with your peers. You learn how to solve a problem, how to manage certain situations, how to control yourself and your emotions. And not that what you're learning in the classroom isn't important, but, there's a lot of content that, kids aren't going to use, but those personal skills and those sort of, the knowledge of how to control or at least understand and monitor your own emotions can be super important. Yet you pointed to the idea of maybe starting the freshman class or something like that. This is something just, sort of purely from my experience that I wish we did more, particularly when we're trying to teach something personal like social emotional learning. is that it should move up with the students. Like I would love, and I understand why we don't do it in public school systems. It's very difficult to sort of administrate. Like the bureaucracy is not built for phased in change. But like a few years ago, even outside of a social emotional learning, we changed our grading policies. The problem is for a kid who's a senior and is all of a sudden told, hey, your homework isn't graded, none of the practice is graded, we're only grading the tests and the projects. To the senior who has learned to do everything for a grade, that sounds like a free pass to quit doing the practice. But if you introduce that to a kid, say in 6th grade, when they leave elementary school, school changes a little bit, and then next year it's 6th and 7th and on up, that becomes a normal thing. And you get a natural buy-in, and it allows those students to sort of like, this is the ecosystem they function in. And so that's one of the things that I've seen with social emotional learning is that it tends, again, small sample size in my experience, it tends to go better, say in high school with the 9th grade students, just because they're in 9th grade, they don't know anything. It's all new to them, right? This is why, freshmen, everyone makes fun of teaching freshmen. Like freshmen are easy to teach because they don't know anything. You can scare them, you can tease them, you can be their best buddy. It doesn't matter. They have no idea, but then you phase it in where if a kid has gone, they're 17, 18 years old, they're a senior in high school, they've had little or no sort of mindfulness training, no personal or life coaching. And all of a sudden you're throwing this at them. Right. Not that doesn't help any of those kids, but I think the buy-in rate is significantly lower than when you catch kids at those transition points, say entering high school and things like that. And so if you have if Robin can provide a service, or if anyone can sort of do it in such a way where you use those natural transitions in the kids' experience and their education to introduce these new concepts, to introduce these new skills, it feels more natural. And I think it's probably easier for everyone involved. It's just really hard to do that. Like if you're the principal and things like that. This is a question that I sort of have for a lot of people who are in sort of an entrepreneurial space related to education, whether it's ed tech or coaching services, things like this. How often, when you're in like the adoption process, how often do schools bring students into that discussion? Like, when someone's considering, obtaining your services, how often do they ask students to test it out or bring them to a meeting versus how much of it is a principal saying, how much does it cost and how do we schedule it kind of stuff? Like what is that process like for actually getting into a school?
Sure. And it's so interesting you brought it up because that's where I wanted to go to. In the beginning, when we first started, principals did bring students more often to the conversation. And part of it was by request in hey, wouldn't it be great, to your point about juniors and seniors kind of halfway out the door, sort of turning the cards on them a little bit, getting not only buy-in, but getting their voice into the conversation can change the dynamic of the program. So a few of our schools that we first started, there was a school out in New Jersey that one of our first customers, the principal brought the student council to every Zoom call. The student council, again, a representation of the student body, drove the agenda on the types of coaches and the types of topics. And the buy-in at that school was through the roof. Right? We had a Zoom coaching session. I learned this early on. I kicked it off. I'm the co-founder and CEO, Robin. Who cares? No one does. Absolutely no one. Maybe my mom, right? Other than that, but when I asked the next session, I asked the student council president to kick it off as opposed to me. You should have seen not only the buy-in, but the cameras. This was in an all Zoom world. We do a lot of in-person now as well. But back then, he asked everybody to turn the cameras on. So did I. 80% more students listened to the student council president than me. Of course, that's their community. So getting the buy-in early. Now, I wouldn't say it happens more than 50%. I would say probably 20 to 30% of the time that a student representative is brought into the process of onboarding. We always request and ask and suggest. We never tell. That's just not who we are. Again, every community is different. We don't know what that school looks and feels like. But we do give a case study and suggestion to say, hey, if you have a representative, a student council, it doesn't matter who it might be, but to also sit in the room with the principal or the superintendent or the school counselor, the program goes a long way. And the buy-in at that point, even from the teachers, goes a long way because it's one of their students that is standing up. I can tell you another school, we won a school contract because a 17-year-old reached out to us. at info@myrobin.com. It was like our first email we ever got. It was so exciting that an inbound lead came. And it was a student saying, I think there's a challenge and I would like you to speak to our principal. 24 hours later, he emailed us directly and CC'd his principal. 2 days after that, we were on with the head of PA, the head of guidance, the student council, or the steering committee in this school. And 3 weeks later, we were in their school. And that's not because the Robin program, they loved it right away. And I think they did. But it's because it was driven by a 17-year-old who pointed out that he has the pulse of this school, not Sonny, that the students are asking for some support here. And it's not just a school counselor or a therapist, it's to learn, because it wasn't just one student at the point. Because if there's a student going through some challenges, I hope he or she has an outlet to turn to. But this was, again, community-wide across the school, that there were some challenges that Robin could help support.
Yeah, you said it nicely. We suggest, we don't tell. And from your position, providing a service as a private company, it's very smart in the approach. I think that student, I don't know, the phrase voice and choice, is everywhere, and to the point where it annoys me. But I really wish that upper administration took those ideas more seriously. I say that like we just adopted new book lists, for reading and English classes in my schools. And then they're like, well, you should have a kid reading this with the whole class, and then let them choose from this list and read this stuff on their own independently. And I'm like, you know how lucky I am if I get a kid to read one book. We're pushing two. All right, you know what? That's fine. But it's a list that a lot of teachers don't love and that a lot of the students are unfamiliar with. And I'm like, if you really wanted student voice and choice, you should have had kids in the meeting along with the teachers creating the book list in the first place. You dictated, here are your options, and then said, well, why aren't you happy with the choices you have? And I think that there's a lot of services that we provide, or we try to provide students, where they know, like you said, they know what they need, and they know what their friends would benefit from. Sure. And there's a wealth of information that sometimes goes untapped because students aren't brought into those meetings. It's right. Students get to put the icing on the cake, but they don't get to choose anything leading into that point. And I don't know if that's really, productive. Just on a personal note, I'm curious, you're a successful guy, business leader, and you've referenced, your own high school experience a little bit. As a student, would you have been interested? Like if you were invited to a meeting like that, like were you the kind of guy, say in high school, or if your school is considering a new social emotional learning program or a new book list or, whatever it is, would you have been interested in being part of that conversation yourself?
It's hard to put myself back there and really think, because I'm so clouded, because I'm so into it right now. But I can tell you, I wasn't a great student. I was a really good student in elementary, and it seemed I got worse as the grades, as we progressed. I think I would have been open to some of it for sure. And I say that confidently because the skill sets I learned, you had a really good quote that I might take. You learn in the hallways or cafeteria. I was a hallways or cafeteria type guy. I was lucky enough to have a mom growing up in New Jersey, Indian descent. My family came from India here in the 70s. I had parents that weren't necessarily the parents that you got to be a doctor, lawyer, banker. They said you got to be a good person. And I learned the value of socializing and networking, and meeting different types of people and different students. And I was lucky enough to have a wide variety of friends of colors and shapes and grades. And I enjoyed that. So if there was a class about how to develop these social skills, or if you're anxious about something, I think I'd be open to that, especially if it got me out of, history or math at the time. So, and I think now more than ever, because it wasn't, my high school experience was health class, and they talked about the birds and the bees once in a while, and then gym, and then it was curriculum and test and getting ready for certain exams.
For a week before prom, they drill you on not drinking and driving,
as though they bring the car in front.
They put the car in the front. Like, there probably could have been a lead into all of this about how we just make good decisions for ourselves and live a healthy life, not before you revert straight to the scare tactics. And I identify with a lot of what you're saying. I was a good student, but by the time high school hit, I was kind of as good a student as I needed to be. And so my parents were cool with A- and B+, and I was cool as long as
That
they
was
were
cool.
cool. And,
Right.
if my parents had been like, you have to have A+, I probably would have done it, but I read a ton in high school. I read about half of what was assigned, like,
Right.
and so I'm always sympathetic to my students, and I've got a kid who's 16, 17, 18 years old. And, they feel maybe a little jaded about some of these things. I would say, like, we got to find the purpose. We got to find the reason that this is useful to you. And as an English teacher, I certainly have an easier conversation than maybe their history or their science teacher or something, because not everyone is going to use all of that content. I tell kids all the time, like, I guarantee you, this is the one class every one of you is going to use. You may not need to know the book we read, but your ability to read or, have a good discussion, your ability to write clearly, it's going to benefit you no matter what you do. So I can get to that purpose, and kids are like, all right, fine. And I get a little buy-in that way, because they understand, like, hey, this is going to benefit me personally, professionally, et cetera. But sometimes you really have to sort of figure out for that individual student, what's that going to be. As you were leaving high school, like, what did you study? Because you said you weren't a teacher. Like, what did you go to college for? What sort of lit that fire for you as you were entering into adulthood?
Yeah, for me, I went to Syracuse University out of high school, which I was really excited about. Had a wonderful experience there. I studied information management. It was at the time, late 90s, early 2000, the internet revolution. It was a new courses offered there. It was kind of mixing technology and business. And at that point, as sort of a newbie in that world, something new and exciting, I latched onto it. And it wasn't necessarily passion. It was happenstance and circumstance, and being a little bit opportunistic at the time. But some of the key things I learned during those 4 years outside of the walls of sitting in school were about people and relationships. And when you're on your own and understanding different people's purpose and pathway to get them there and where they want to go, to me, it was an unbelievable experience, those 4 years of meeting those types of people, some of which I'm still best friends with today. But I would be lying to say I had this goal. I wanted to go here, go to grad school and do this, this, and this. I didn't. I didn't have that lined up. And I'm, I don't know if jealous is the right word, but it's inspiring to see some kids that know what they want to do, even if they change the course. But there's kids out there. I have a family member and my wife's family. They know, hey, I want to be a doctor, and here's why. Not just with my dad or mom, but here's why. And you were talking about passion and purpose. And maybe one day you'll try. We have this awesome course called Passion versus Purpose, and the difference. And it's for high school seniors, right? A lot of seniors like this. We have a wonderful Coach Jeff Hittner, that takes people through this, and it's fascinating how he talks about the differences and nuances. And you don't need to know in high school, right? That's part of the message to our students. You don't need to know what you want to be when you grow up. I'm 41. I'm just learning that right now. And that doesn't mean I haven't been successful or I'm any different. I think understanding your own path, but getting the tools earlier on to help you decide, that doesn't mean you have to. But I think it's, hey, we want the toolkits. We want our kids, right, as parents, to have everything. And part of having everything is having the ability, the skill set, the mindset, the ability to go be a teacher, a firefighter, a banker, a lawyer, or think about how they want to get there. I think that's one of the things I think about in school that, I wish we taught more of, is how to think about those things, how to process those things. I know everybody talks about, I wish I knew how to pay my taxes or understand a mortgage. I think that's very important. And then that should be part of it. But I also think part of things, how do you network? How do you interact with people? Adults could use it too, right? In this post-COVID world, I talk to people in an office building, awkward conversations by the water cooler. That never used to be awkward, right?
Yeah.
It used to be, let's talk about the game, or what Netflix show did you binge last night? Now people are like, oh, blah, blah, blah. So I think
it's like everybody had to put a belt back on, and it choked off the blood of their brain. Like when all of a sudden sweatpants weren't the thing, I can't handle myself anymore, No, so, it's interesting how you point all this out, that the passion, the purpose, and I do that a lot. That's actually I'm interested to hear more about that, just because that's actually how I designed my 12th grade class a lot. Is cool. Every book, we basically only do memoirs and autobiographies and things like that. It's like, hey, let's figure out what sort of what we can learn from other people that help us to learn to be better versions of ourselves. And, you used this line earlier, and I thought this is great. My wife and I say this to our kids before they go to bed at night, is be a good person. You could be, my son's 5, he wants to be an artist. You could be an artist, a lawyer. I don't care. In the end, as long as you're a good person, you'll sort the rest out. If you're a terrible human being, though, like I have failed miserably, whether you're rich or poor, as long as you're a good guy, you're going to sort it out. And so providing students some opportunities to build those skills or to build those relationships in school, I think is great. And for that to be part of the purpose of what we're doing. That should be part of it. There's a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of social emotional learning that really goes on in students' extracurriculars. The average kid, playing high school baseball or basketball, most of them aren't going to play in college, and almost none of them are ever going to go pro, or they're going to, this is something they should be doing for fun. And sometimes they get competitive and they can forget about it. But the most important thing they're learning is how do I work well with this team? How do I take instruction from the coach? How do I overcome failure? How do I bounce back? And I learn perseverance. And that's really important, but it's also not something that's built into the day, because some kids don't participate in those things. Some kids don't have families that support those endeavors. And so a good social emotional learning program brings some of the benefits, some of the real applicable skills that you get from drama, from band, from sports, and it brings it into a place where every kid has access to it. And I think that that's really important. The question is always then, some of the delivery stuff we've already talked about, but considering that, clearly this is a purpose of yours, and this is Robin's purpose, is to deliver students these opportunities to learn and to grow personally, to be sort of better adjusted emotionally, to get along well with others, et cetera. I'm curious about how that sort of relates to or interacts with your ideas about the purpose of school. So something that I ask all guests on this podcast is, what is it we're trying to do? And I think if you watch cable news over the last year or two, you hear them talk about schools, and it's just people screaming, and it's usually about surface issues, how we talk about history or how we read a book or something like that. And I think sometimes we end up in these debates because we don't first establish what is it we're trying to accomplish. What is it we're trying to do for our students and for our communities? So for you personally, and throw in professionally through Robin, but in your eyes, what is the purpose of school? What is it we're trying to accomplish for these young people?
Sure. It's a great thought and question. And I'll sort of give you my gut reaction or instincts around this. I think the first goal, especially as you start school, right? And I see this, and I can relate it to my kids, and I see it happening. Look, get kids excited about learning, right? In its simple form, right? Get kids excited to learn how to play basketball, to learn how to read a book, to learn their ABCs, to learn how to do calculus. Get excited about curiosity, asking questions. I think great elementary schools, right? Get kids really excited and sets up that foundation for, when you grow up and go to sort of 4th, 5th grade, middle school, et cetera. Because then sort of the purpose, it continues to get kids excited about learning, but they're setting them up to be, I think, good citizens, right? Good people, right? Good human beings to interact with each other, deal with life's challenges together, and develop a baseline of education, which includes math and history and English and science. Because if you pique curiosity, most likely many students will want to learn a little bit of everything, right? And as you get older and you might take APs or honor classes or do certain extracurriculars, you start to develop an excitement, a passion around one subject, one sport, one thing. So as you go through school, at least how I think about the life cycle of school as I saw it and I'm seeing it now, you get kids really excited. They start learning different subjects, different ideas, different theories, different facts. And then as you get older, and certainly obviously in higher education, you get to go choose now. Here's where I want to major, I want to minor, and I want to focus my time and effort. And at that level, education gets a little bit, let's go deeper, right? We're not going as broad, but let's go deeper and let's really learn and teach you some of the basic facts and figures and people that brought us to this point. But actually, now empower and give you, the student, no matter how old you are, the ability to take that and do whatever you want with it, right? To practice it, to throw it in the garbage and do something else, but it's yours to do whatever. And I think that's the power of education. as I told you, I was a B student, right, in school. But I remember teachers' names. I remember friends. I remember moments. I remember reading Hamlet in senior year and having to write an essay, and I got a really bad grade on that essay. And I applied early to college, and I got in, and I was so excited. So I had senioritis, I guess they used to call it back then. And my English teacher said, "Sonny, you want to go to Syracuse? I'm going to write them a letter and tell them you're going to get an F unless you do X." She scared the bejesus out of it. I didn't know what she can or can't do at that time. I'm an exciting senior. I reread it. I wrote a different essay and did an oral presentation. I remember that vividly.
Yeah.
Right. I happen to like some Shakespeare and Hamlet. I love the story. Maybe that's why. But there are these moments, right, in school. I didn't make varsity any sport. I told you in the beginning. I made freshman basketball, and I made a game-winning layup. I remember that moment. That was the highlight of my sports career. So school creates these moments, right? That again, 41. Hopefully, when I'm 61 and 81 and 101, I can remember those moments. And that's where that's sort of one of the things that I think all schools hopefully do and should do. For everybody.
Yeah. Well, and and I think you hit on the idea too, that those experiences and opportunities look different to each kid.
Yeah.
Which is one of the, we're not going to get into like a school funding talk, but that is one of the most important parts of school funding, in my opinion, is that well-funded schools provide students a lot of these opportunities. They're just sort of built into what you're doing. We have the extracurriculars, we have extra classes you can take, you can choose IB, AP, all of this. When we talk about, an underprivileged school and underfunded school, those opportunities are fewer, and so the students aren't going to walk away having as many of those memories, or if they have them, they're not going to have as many good ones, and I think that can not only taint the experience, but sometimes the product to a certain extent. As we think about that, you sort of pointed out, as you get older in school, you'd like to see, certainly in higher ed, but you sort of hinted at maybe at the end of high school, how students start to learn more about the things they're more interested in, which implies flexibility in a curriculum. And so,
right.
Not to sway your answer, but that's something big for me. I really, really wish that by the time kids were junior, senior in high school, if they can demonstrate basic competency in literacy and basic math, I wish we would just open up the curriculum and let them do what they want to do. Like, you got to be here, you got to take some classes, but go ahead and start to specialize a little bit, focus on what you really want. The idea that you have to continue to take each core subject all 4 years isn't necessarily bad, but I think we lose some students and maybe give up some opportunities. If you had the opportunity to design your own school, and imagine for a moment, maybe like it's a private school sort of situation where all you have to do is make sure kids are learning, they're not getting hurt, and keep the community relatively happy about it. But you could do literally anything, forest school, make it like college, you name it. To you, what would be the ideal school? What would be the kind of school that you would want to deliver if you were suddenly put into the role of principal or superintendent, where you got to call those shots?
Sure. Wow, interesting question. I use the term flexibility. I like that too. We use it for Robin, and I believe in it. But part of me, if I had the resources and this magic wand and I created my own school, I would put educators and students at the center of decision making. And I would have them to my right and left and across from me to think about, how do we create the best environment for our community, right? So I happen to live in New York City. Lots of people, lots of culture, lots of languages. Might be different than a school we work with in rural Iowa. Very different. Can't see the next school for hundreds of miles. So I would say, if it's in my community, I would learn from my community and attract the types of people that want to be part of this community, right? Who want to get excited about learning, who want to learn the basic fundamentals of education, of classes. And I love history and English and math and science, some of the basic things. But I also agree with you, at a certain point, I think it got introduced in our school, or 7th or 8th grade, you can speak Spanish or French, right? You have to take a foreign language, you pick one of the two. Now it's maybe one of 15 languages. But I love that, the power of choice, right? Because you get kids really, really excited. Now, if they're not good in math, let's say, I'm not necessarily saying let's not do math. I think there are basic fundamentals that you should learn, but after you do pass a certain hurdle, I do like the fact that you can now focus more on art or something else. Again, as long as you have the basic fundamentals, I do think it's important. I'm a little bit of a traditionalist. I do like the four walls of a school and light instead of closed brick. I think my high school out in Parsippany Hills, New Jersey, was a great school. That's again all I know and what I know, but it was a cafeteria where you can sit wherever you want with your friends, right? It was shaped, I think like an octagon or an oval, right? So you walked around and you saw everybody. To me, I like that as opposed to different wings, right? I think actually physical space matters. Obviously, nice windows and light, but being around, I like interaction, right? You can separate different 5-year-olds from the 12th graders, sure, but I actually think there's something, my daughter goes to school with a K through 5, being around older kids, sitting on the bus with them, learning from them. I like commingling different types of people, different ages in my school. So I would say that is a cohort. I do like some traditional things like of a school, like gym, physical movement at all ages, I think should be a part of it. If it's cold outside, we'll do something inside. If it's a beautiful day, let's go outside. And lastly, I'll say it's a fun thing, and I guess I learned it because of COVID. Teaching outside, it's possible, and it's a small thing, but fresh air. There's something I think we all learned about the value of getting outside when we were stuck in our homes, and we took it for granted. And I think if we had there's a school we talked to in Michigan that had classes outside. And I'm like, Michigan in the winter, that seemed, he said the students want it and the parents love it. And the kids learn because they're excited. It's their outdoor class and they have this rotational program. I think that's fascinating. Yeah. I don't want to sit in the snow, but it's something around that. I think I'd have some fun.
Yeah. Situation. Again, I guess we adapt to the local community,
Yeah.
For me, I like, I take classes outside, it's reading time. And I let them know that whether you read a lot or little or nothing, it's due by next class. So some of the kids read, some just sit and look at the clouds. I'm not going to yell at you. You get to be outside. Make sure it's done for next time. No, I mean, and I think a lot of that sort of that focus on sort of controlled choice, I think makes sense. I like how you hit on the age thing, which I think works really nicely with your personal sort of work with social emotional learning. School is one of the only times in your whole life when you're grouped with people based on your age, not actually based on your interest or abilities. And I know in theory, yes, they're based on their abilities, but I mean, we do so much social promotion. Kids just move up because that's what you do at the end of the year. It's pretty hard to get held back these days. And so as a result, you have kids who are, basically just sitting around with only kids their own age, which sometimes makes sense. But man, sometimes, some of these kids are more mature. They should be hanging out with older kids, and, you should be hanging out with the younger kids and teaching them how to be less annoying, like do this stuff. That's something that's actually come up in a couple of episodes on this podcast. Early on, talked to some people about like unschooling, and that was actually one of their biggest concerns was that, whether you're in school or out of school, people should be interacting in more natural ways, and that some of the sort of artificial structure of school is, they believe, counterproductive. And maybe not academically, but I think in terms of social emotional learning, I think it's absolutely counterproductive. I think that having a 12-year-old be able to talk to a 15-year-old is a useful thing when we're talking about how to sort of manage our emotions or, get through, adapting to a new school day or, things like that. So yeah, I mean, I love it. I love it. There's sort of a tempered choice in there, which is personally kind of where I'm at. I think that students should have more freedom, but not necessarily total freedom. I still like, there still has to be an adult in the room kind of deal, but I think that getting students' voice involved in the big decisions is gonna yield some positive results. So I've got three questions that sort of give you the lineup here, and this is how we'll wrap this thing up. So I guess first is one that's sort of specific to your work with Robin, and then we're going to sort of do a little open mic, and then I'll ask you about some book or movie recommendations. But first, for you, Robin is a relatively new company. You're only about 3 years old. What's sort of the short-term goal, maybe in the next year or two? I'm sure you want to thrive, you want to be the name in social emotional learning eventually, but like as a company, what is it that you're hoping to accomplish? Is it just get into more schools? You developing curriculum? Like what's the top priority for Robin over the next year or two?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, and we did this as an organization about what are our goals. And I think, yeah, as a young for-profit company that works with schools, we want to work with more schools and districts and a diverse set of them, public, private, charter, Northeast, Southeast, West Coast. I think for us, kind of born and raised in this area, it was natural to start in this area. But it's really important as an organization that we show ourselves and our communities that this works everywhere. Whether you call it SEL or mental wellness, different states have different rules, different pathways, different opportunities. We like the opportunity to work in different areas of the country for sure. Yeah. That's one. Number two, always continue to have the voice of the customer, right? We have student advisors, we have educator advisors, we have parents. So to continue that network and understanding, because things will evolve, whether it's another tragedy, another opportunity, things change, and technology changes. And for us, we always want to balance great technology with the human connection, right? That's why coaching and in-person coaching, virtual Zoom coaching is so important. App, website, login, absolutely. That's how we learn today. That's what we use. We're addicted to our devices, and there's some positive things that come out of that. But coupling that and always staying true to who we are to deliver that human connection, right? As I learned about social emotional learning, the first word is social. To me, you can't be staring at this all day and learn social emotional learning. You just can't. You have to have that human connection. So for us in the next year and two, how do we think about scaling that human connection as a company while maintaining our voice of the customer and always putting the student and educator in front? That is a challenge. That is a challenge as a young business as we grow, right? No matter what, we get 50 schools, we get X funding, we do A, B, and C. To me, impact, measuring not just your ROI and investment, but how are you impacting students and educators, right? We have anecdotes, we have stories, we have great quotes. I hope in the next year or two, we have some real hardcore data that says we're really improving the lives. And here's the data. Here are the quotes. Here are the statements. And here are the schools that continue to use us. So as part of getting into more schools and getting more opportunities, show the efficacy of our program, right, by data and studies, and show that schools are coming back, because that means kids are starting to learn, because we're not teaching mindfulness and resiliency in a day, a month, or even 6 months, right? It takes time. And I think part of the consistency and the opportunity that we're seeing is to develop that and work alongside with those on the other end, right? We're continuing to shape our product. And I think that's what's so great about a young, flexible company. They get to do things like that. So near term, 1 to 2 years, use the voice of the customer, have our human connection, and start getting into more communities and start retaining, right? Our first real renewal cycles are coming up. Let's hope our schools come back to show us that we're doing a really good job.
Absolutely. And that sounds great. And you hit on one of my biggest concerns that I always think about, anytime, I talk to someone who has like a really cool, innovative idea for school is it turns out, how do we scale it? And I was like, wow, but you got to be so careful because schools are so different. Communities are so different. Finding something that works great for a few schools in one region is awesome. And as soon as you say like, we're going to scale this out and go big, like, oh yeah, that's so hard to do well, and you guys are sort of on the precipice of that. So I wish you all the best of luck there. All right. So final 2 questions. This is how all these ClassCast podcast episodes wrap up. I give you a short open mic. So if there's anything we either didn't talk about that you wish we had, or if you want to sort of give a quick summation, an elevator pitch, anything you want, just anything that you think you'd like to put out there that we didn't already cover, and then a couple book and movie recommendations for our listeners. So is there anything that you'd like to hit on that we missed?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to reiterate one point with a little bit of a sort of story and thought. I think you said you were surprised to hear someone talk about teacher mental health or teacher SEL in some ways. We were at a conference in upstate New York, the School Counselors Conference, about 2-3 months ago. And we were talking to school counselors and, networking, business, giving things away. As part of our business development and marketing. And, we gave away AirPods or a prize to come see our booth, right? And we gave away a coaching session. We actually gave 3 away. as part of the conference. Really exciting, really fun. Interestingly enough, a week later and then 3 weeks later, we heard back from all three of those schools that won a free coaching session for their students, right? A 1 hour coaching session with any Robin coach. All three counselors and administrators, when they followed up, asked, "Thank you so much, but do you mind if we use this on us?" All three came back with that answer. So does that mean that school didn't care about their students? Of course not, right? That their school counselors, their administrators, of course they care. But the fact that three, and again, it's only three, came back and said, "This is a really cool concept. Boy, I wish we had it for us." It was one data point amongst now many others that you read about, that you see in your community, my community, and certainly through Robin's community, that the educators, and I don't mean just the teacher or the school counselor or the administrator, I mean the bus driver, I mean the janitor, I mean the cafeteria worker, I mean anybody involved in our school community, they need our support. There was a school that said, "Great, I'm interested in your program, but you know what? Who needs it first? Our bus drivers, large community, are really struggling. They're the first adult most parents see in the morning, or maybe most students see in the morning at drop-off. And they complain, or there's an issue, whether it's mask or no mask. Do they forget their book bag or other challenges? Are you late or not?" And they're frustrated and they're burnt out and they're thinking about quitting. So can you support our transportation team? First time I heard that, right? I don't have a program for transportation team, but what I heard is a community member who's really important to the kids is struggling, broadly speaking, not one particular, broadly speaking. So as a community and a provider, right, as listening to our customer, I want to create, can't be everything to everyone, but now Robin has listened. And we have this wonderful new program that we just rolled out for educators too. And I'll tell you, I tell you, Ryan, it's being talked about a lot, again, in our little community of schools, even more than the students sometimes. And I say that with a smile because I'm glad administrators are also caring and seeing. You said a teacher once said to me, "Sonny, don't ever tell me I need an extra spa day or a glass of wine at night," right? Self-care is important. I think it's very important. We talk about self-care, self-regulation, but our teachers need our support in a very different way right now. And I think that's important. And I think that whether it's Robin, whether it's other companies, whether it's a school, they're teaching our kids. They're teaching my kids, right? So I want them to be in the best spot possible. So for me, that's just one thing I want to leave everybody with. That I'm so amazed at what educators do. Again, not knowing till you see it as a dad and and now in the world of education, it's unbelievable. My job's easy compared to a fifth grade teacher. Are you kidding me? I could do that job. This job, I get to talk to you and do a podcast. This is fun. So that sort of is what I'll leave.
Yeah. No, I love it. And as an ending note, I'm kind of glad you circled back around to it, because that is something that, I think distinguished parts of this conversation from some others that I've had, and probably speaks to a lot of the concerns. I mean, where I live is one of the smallest counties in Virginia, and where I teach is I teach in Loudoun County, which is one of the wealthiest counties in the country, just on sort of the other side of the mountain from where I live. And neither place can hire and maintain bus drivers, and both have concerns about teacher retention, and and they're very different places in terms of the pay structures and the rest. And in the end, it doesn't appear that money alone is the answer to this. We really got to consider, what are we doing to serve those people, to support that school staff. And a spa day is nice but doesn't do it, and a pay raise is great, but that may not solve the problem entirely either. And so I think what you're talking about, and sort of considering wellness and helping people to sort of think and feel better is great. I think it's vital. All right, so last question. This is a little bit of sort of personality piece, a little bit of just for fun. Couple of books or movies or both that you would like to recommend. This can be anything at all. I have people who give me like a list of their favorite baseball movies. I have people who give me only education related books. There is no wrong answer. What are a couple of books and or movies that you really appreciate and you think listeners might enjoy or might want to check out?
Sure. I love reading. I love movies. I love old movies more than some of the newer movies, but I'll give you two books or two things that pop out of mind. my wife says I read too many business related books or autobiographies of presidents or people, which I really love. So I'm reading other books and stories. And I read a book a while ago. It's a very popular book called Shantaram. It's a story about an Australian prisoner, somebody in Australia who fled to India in the 1980s. And it's a story about how he lived and navigated. And it's a phenomenal story. But it also, for me, having parents from India, having gone there, but, just another story of learning a little bit about culture and a story about, a place that I haven't spent a lot of time, but that my parents and ancestors came from. Again, it's a fascinating story more than anything, but it happens to be taking place where my mom grew up. So it's a fun story. It's a big book, but it's a great read that I highly recommend, Shantaram. And, I read a book. I was at a conference recently. So this is just top of mind. And there was a chapter, it's called The Catalyst. And it's, I'm blanking on the author. It's a fairly famous author, and it's how to change people's mind, right? What is the catalyst? And you referenced something about students earlier, and it made me think of this case study. So when they had the no smoking campaign, in the 70s, 80s, how do we get kids to stop smoking? There were many, many efforts. Tell them to stop, scare them with these heart disease, lung disease, all these, billboards. And then they hired this guy, I'm blanking on his name. And his fascinating idea was stop telling kids to stop smoking, right? Stop forcing them. Don't tell them what to do because they're going to rebel. They're going to this, and start bringing students to the table, right? The voice of the student. And over years now, cigarette tax, other things were happening to help this happen. But it's a fascinating book, and they have stories within it. And I like business reads or inspirational reads with real life stories, not you should do this but this is actually what happened. And I just love this story because it involves students, bringing students to the table and asking them, why do you smoke? Why do you do this? How do you get kids to stop? And one student said, stop telling kids to stop, and you're going to win 20% of people will stop smoking right there.
Yeah.
And he was right. I mean, I'm using a little, paraphrases here from the case study, but it's a really cool read. And students can read it, adults can read it. It can be used in business settings, school settings, debate settings. And I find it some cool, actually usable practical strategies. I like to use the word practical, real world, that you can use during a class, during a negotiation, during a business conversation that I think could work. So I really like that.
That I will definitely check that one out, because that's my favorite class that teaches AP language and composition. It's a rhetoric class. It's all about persuasion. And so it's, to read it some nonfiction, but to get the case study out of it. And by the way, just as an anecdote, I always tell my students the primary difference between my experience in high school and theirs is that they carry the internet in their pocket, and I had to go sit down somewhere special to do it. And that way fewer of them smoke than my friends did. And they're like, really? And I was like, yeah, all those ads that you saw, that I was like, we all thought that was really lame. And then it turned out it wasn't for us. That was all geared. They were trying to catch people young and phase it in, and it worked. So, all right. So we got Shantaram and The Catalyst. Any others?
There's so many more, I guess.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but like favorite movie or anything else there?
I'll share another book that I read. Again, it's I love autobiographies. I love reading about people, and whether it's a politician, whether you agree or disagree, it's more about hearing stories. So Obama's book just came out in the past couple of years, and just hearing stories about what happens behind the scenes at a White House, right, during a president, it is fascinating. And it's stories not just about major decisions, but about him. And at the time, the speaker during part of his presidency was John Boehner, and he talks about a story. They love to play golf, and they're smoking cigarettes away from their wives because their wives didn't like them. And you don't think of these stories when you think of presidents. And to me, as somebody who likes American history, to hear about a recent president that we lived through, some of the things you don't see, stories about him and working with the House, the Senate, this. And golf conversations and things of that nature. I find it fascinating, and the stories, and they're really fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll check that out. I read several years ago, I read Dreams from My Father, like his first book where he talked about growing up, which was,
Yeah.
I just sort of, I was like, oh, I got it. I don't, and by the time I was done, I was like, I loved it. I loved it. I really didn't expect much from it, and I ended up really enjoying it. So if this is written in a similar manner, that'd be great. All right. Well, as we get ready to wrap this thing up, Sonny, is there anywhere that people might be able to reach out to get more information about Robin or about you, your work? Do you have social media accounts or website that you'd like to point listeners to in case they'd like some more information?
Sure, I appreciate that. Our website is my-robin, ROBIN.com. You can check us out. All of our contact information is there. We're on all the different fun social media sites. Robin_stories is most of them on Instagram and Twitter. But yeah, our website's a great place to learn more for those students, educators, parents. Love to get feedback. And for those, I'm Sonny at my-robin.com. If you have any questions, thoughts, ideas, you want to come join the team in any, please don't hesitate to reach out. Again, we're learning, we're growing, and most importantly, we want to hear from you in your community. So Ryan, thank you so much for the opportunity. I had a lot of fun today. And I very much appreciate your thought, your questions, and love to continue the conversation offline as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. All right, guys. So there's the contact information. I'll get all that put up in the show notes. As always, you can find the ClassCast podcast on all major streaming services, plus on YouTube and at classcastpodcast.com. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.